They said they'd stand by him forever. They swore it through champagne smiles, through late-night strategy sessions, through years of bloodshot eyes and sleepless triumphs. But when the fire came, they ran. And Damian Cole watched them go. Partners, friends, family, all vanishing into the smoke while his world turned to ash around him. 3 years earlier, Damian had been the golden boy of the tech world. At just 28, he had built Strata Systems, a bold startup that promised to revolutionize urban construction with autonomous robotics. Investors swarmed. The press called him the next Musk. His face was on magazine covers. His talks went viral. He was unstoppable, until he wasn't. The collapse began with a single faulty update to Stratus's flagship robot platform. One glitch in the navigation software triggered a cascade of failures across half a dozen active construction sites. Walls buckled. Cranes stalled midair. No one died, but the footage was catastrophic. It went viral in minutes. Within days, city contracts were canceled. Investors fled. Lawsuits piled up like corpses. And his team fractured. First came the whispers, then the meetings behind closed doors. Then, one by one, the people who had once sworn they would build the future with him began handing in resignations. Even his co-founder, his best friend since college, quit with a single, cold message, "I can't go down with you." By the end, Damian stood alone in the cavernous Stratus headquarters, surrounded by silent desks and the echo of footsteps that would never return. He tried to fight, tried to reassure the board, the press, the few employees who hadn't bolted yet. But the weight was too much. The banks froze his accounts. The board ousted him as CEO. He sold his shares to cover the legal fallout. Strata Systems was gutted, sold for scraps. And Damian was left with nothing. No company, no friends, no future. He vanished. For months, he drifted through the city like a shadow. He lived out of motels. He stopped answering calls. He stopped speaking to anyone at all. He watched from a distance as the people who had once cheered for him rewrote history, pretending they had always known he was too reckless, too arrogant, too young to lead. They erased him. And maybe, he thought, they were right too. Maybe this was how his story ended. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with quiet disappearance. Until the night he returned to the ruins. It was past midnight when he crept into the abandoned Stratus warehouse. The company's logo still clung to the wall in faded paint. The place smelled of dust and rust and old dreams. He walked the empty floor where hundreds had once worked. He touched the cold rails where the robots had glided on their tracks. And for the first time in months, he let himself remember why he had started all of this. Not for applause, not for wealth, because he had wanted to build things that lasted. And somehow, that dream was still alive, buried under the rubble, faint and stubborn, refusing to die. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor, pulled out the battered notebook he had carried through all his wandering, and began to sketch. A new design. Simpler, stronger, smarter. Not a company. Not yet. Just the seed of one. He worked until the sun bled through the shattered windows. Then he stood, staring at the sketches in his lap, and whispered to the ghosts. They walked away. He closed the notebook. Now I build alone. The new beginning didn't feel like a beginning at all. It felt like crawling through ashes. Damian rented a forgotten machine shop on the edge of the city. A cracked concrete floor, rust-streaked walls, and a single flickering overhead light that buzzed like an angry hornet. It smelled like oil and ghosts. He dragged in an old workbench from a junkyard, borrowed a second-hand 3D printer, and built a makeshift cot in the corner. It wasn't an office. It was a bunker. And every morning, he woke up, brewed instant coffee on a camp stove, and opened his battered notebook to the page where he had written one word in jagged ink: reclaim. He had no team, no investors, no reputation left, just anger and hunger. This time, he didn't try to rebuild Stratus. That corpse was gone. Instead, he set out to build something lean, unbreakable, and quiet. A robotic construction unit designed to be operated by a single person, transportable in a small truck, able to 3D print modular concrete housing faster and cheaper than traditional crews. He called it Forge 1. It was the opposite of everything Stratus had been. No massive teams, no sprawling sites, no fragile software towers waiting to collapse. Just one man and one machine. Damien worked like a man possessed. He scavenged steel frames from scrapyards, stripped wiring from old industrial robots, and welded pieces together until his arms ached. When something didn't fit, he cut it down. When something broke, he rebuilt it. When he ran out of materials, he biked across the city to construction sites begging for discarded scrap. He worked in silence, headphones dead, phone off, the world forgotten. The nights were the worst. Alone on his cot under the buzzing light, he stared at the ceiling and remembered the old days. Glass offices, packed meetings, applause echoing off the walls. He remembered their faces, the ones who had once sworn they would never leave, and the way they hadn't even looked back when they walked away. Those memories burned. So he used the fire. He turned it into hours, into blisters, into the relentless grind of trial and error. Weeks bled into months. There were moments he thought he was insane, screaming into the darkness at 3 a.m. when the prototype collapsed again. But every failure taught him something. Slowly, Forge 1 took shape. A skeletal robotic arm on tank treads, carrying a compact concrete extruder, guided by a simple tablet interface he coded from scratch. It wasn't beautiful. It looked like a rusted insect with too many joints. But it worked. In 4 hours, Forge 1 printed a single-room structure with precision that stunned even him. He stood in the shop's doorway at dawn, staring at the finished shell, and whispered, "You're alive." But having it wasn't enough. He needed proof. He needed someone to let him test it. So he walked back into the world that had erased him. Door after door slammed in his face. Old contacts hung up on him. Investors laughed. City planners refused to return his emails. No one wanted to be the first to trust the man who had burned the last empire. Until one afternoon, he found himself standing in front of a sagging community shelter in the poorest part of the city, a crumbling building that had been half-condemned for years. The director, an exhausted man named Harris, looked at him like he was crazy. "You're that Damien Cole," Harris said. "I was," Damien replied. "And you want to build something here?" "Yes. For free." Harris frowned. "Why?" "Because everyone said I couldn't." Harris studied him for a long time, then finally said, "You've got one shot." Damien brought Forge 1 to the site on the back of a rented flatbed truck. For 3 days, he barely slept, guiding the robot like an orchestra conductor while it printed wall after wall of sleek concrete modules. Kids from the neighborhood gathered behind the fence to watch, wide-eyed, as the strange mechanical creature built an entire wing of the shelter from nothing. When it was done, Harris walked through the echoing halls, fingertips trailing along the smooth concrete. "It's solid," he said quietly. "It'll last decades," Damien replied. Harris turned and looked him in the eye. "I'll make sure people know who did this." And he did. Photos spread online. The fallen tech prodigy building housing for the homeless with a robot he made from scraps. At first, people thought it was fake. Then local news showed up. Then bigger outlets. Suddenly, Damien's name was everywhere again. Not as the reckless failure who lost everything, but as the mad genius who was clawing his way back from the grave. Requests flooded his inbox. Nonprofits, disaster relief groups, small construction firms drowning in labor costs. And for the first time in years, money began to trickle in. Not millions. Not yet, but enough to buy new tools. Enough to hire one assistant. A wiry, sharp-eyed engineer named Matteo who showed up at the shop with grease under his nails and no fear in his eyes. They worked side by side through long nights, sparks flying as they built Forge 2. Faster, stronger, more efficient. The shop that had once been silent now hummed with life. And Damien, though he would never admit it out loud, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope is fragile. Because success attracts noise. And noise attracts the past. Within weeks, former investors started calling. Old rivals. Journalists who had mocked him now wanted interviews. And the same people who had walked away began showing up at his door, smiling like nothing had happened. Damien smiled back and closed the door in their faces. The world that had buried him suddenly couldn't stop talking about him. One viral article turned into 10. 10 turned into hundreds. And within months, forged systems was everywhere. What began as a one-man resurrection project in a forgotten machine shop became a frenzy. Nonprofits ordered units for disaster relief housing. Remote villages ordered them to build clinics and schools. Construction firms signed contracts, desperate to slash costs. And as orders poured in, so did money. The dead shop transformed. Where there had been dust and silence, now there was chaos. Tables lined with robotic arms, CNC machines humming, steel frames stacked in neat rows, and new voices overlapping in the air. Damien had gone from 0 employees to 25 in 3 months. Matteo ran the shop floor like a general. New engineers showed up daily, wide-eyed to work beside the man who had once been a cautionary tale. They whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. That's him. He's really back. At first, it was intoxicating. Damien stayed late walking the aisles, watching the machines assemble pieces with perfect rhythm, listening to the hum of something alive and growing. He should have been happy. But late at night, when everyone left, the old ghost crept back. He'd sit alone in the office above the shop, lights off, staring at the glowing skyline. Because he had been here before. At Stratus, the growth had felt the same. Fast, blinding, unstoppable. Right up until it exploded in his hands. He tried to ignore it. But cracks began to show. The rush to meet demand meant cutting corners. One batch of robots shipped with faulty stabilizers and toppled during use. No one was hurt, but the video of a forge bot collapsing mid-build went viral overnight. Has Cole learned nothing? The headline sneered. The old mockery returned like vultures. Investors called, not with offers, but with warnings. Don't mess this up again. The pressure climbed like rising water. And with it came something darker. The hunger. The part of him that had ruined Stratus. The part that believed if he slowed down for even 1 second, he'd lose everything. He started working 16-hour days. He stopped eating meals, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. He began rewriting his engineer's code at 3 a.m., unable to trust anyone else. Matteo confronted him one night. "You're slipping," he said quietly. "I'm holding this together," Damien snapped. "You're strangling it." The words hit like a punch, but Damien brushed them off. He couldn't stop. Not now. Because the orders were getting bigger. One morning, he opened his inbox and froze. Global Build Corp, one of the largest construction conglomerates in the world, wanted a meeting. They were interested in acquiring forged systems outright. The number they offered was obscene. Hundreds of millions. Signing would mean safety, power, the end of risk forever. But it would also mean giving them everything. They would take his machines, his team, his vision, and twist it for profit until it was just another faceless brand. He told them he needed time to think. That night, Damien stayed in the office long after everyone had gone. The hum of the machines below was distant, like waves crashing far away. He sat at his desk, staring at the old Stratus keycard he still kept in a drawer. He remembered the boardroom where they had stripped everything from him. He remembered the silence after everyone walked away. And he realized with a slow, cold ache, he was walking the same road again. Obsessed, exhausted, chasing speed instead of strength. And if he kept going, Forge would die the same way Stratus had. Not from sabotage, from him. But how do you stop running when you're afraid everything will vanish the second you stand still? The next day, he collapsed. Not metaphorically, literally. He was reviewing blueprints when his vision blurred. His ears rang. Then the world tilted sideways. He woke up on the concrete floor with Matteo kneeling over him, panic in his voice. "Hospital," Matteo was saying. "No," Damien croaked. "Work. Work." Matteo's eyes flashed. "You almost died on your shop floor." The words ripped through the fog like fire. And lying there, staring at the ceiling, Damien saw the truth. He had built Forge the same way he had built Stratus. On obsession, on fear, on the belief that only he could carry it. And if he didn't change, it would all burn again. That night, after Matteo drove him home, Damien sat alone in the dark with the city lights flickering through the blinds. He pulled out his old notebook. The first page still held the word he had written on the night this all began: reclaim. He stared at it for a long time. Then, Slowly, he picked up a pen and wrote under it, "Relinquish." Because maybe the only way to keep this alive was to let it go. The shop was loud again. Too loud. The hum of machines, the slam of steel on steel, the sharp rhythm of keyboards. It all bled together into a frantic roar that pressed against Damien's skull like a vice. Only a few weeks ago, this same sound had thrilled him. Now it sounded like warning sirens. He watched from the mezzanine as his engineers scrambled to meet impossible deadlines. Their shoulders were tight, their faces drawn. Laughter had vanished from the shop floor, replaced by a brittle tension that felt all too familiar. It felt like Stratus in its final days. And that terrified him, because he remembered what came next: fractures, fear, abandonment. The memory of empty desks and echoing footsteps stalked him like a shadow. And this time, there would be no second comeback. He called a meeting. The team gathered in the break room, expecting another list of deadlines, another sprint. No one would meet his eyes. Damien stood in front of them, hands in his pockets, heart hammering like a trapped bird. "I need to say something," he began. They waited. "I'm the reason this place is cracking." That made them look up. "I built Stratus on obsession," he said quietly, "and it collapsed. I built Forge the same way, and it's starting to crack the same way, because I've been trying to carry everything again. And if I don't stop, I'll burn this down too." Silence. Matteo leaned forward. "Then stop." Damien almost laughed. "It's not that simple." "It is," Matteo said. "Let go, or lose it." The words lodged deep in Damien's chest like an anchor. He thought of the word he had written in his notebook the night before: relinquish. And for the first time in years, he decided to mean it. That night, he made a list of everything he refused to release, and one by one, he gave it away. He appointed Matteo as head of operations with full control of production schedules. He promoted 3 engineers to team leads, giving each ownership of their part of the design pipeline. He stopped rewriting code at night. He stopped making every decision. He stopped trying to be the engine. Instead, he became the architect. The shift was terrifying. The first week, he woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, convinced the whole place was collapsing without him. But it didn't. In fact, it thrived. Bugs disappeared. Deadlines stopped slipping. Productivity soared. People smiled again. The shop floor began buzzing with laughter, music, arguments, the messy, beautiful noise of a place that was alive again. Damien walked through it all like a man exploring a city he'd dreamed about, but never thought he'd see. Because for the first time, Forge didn't need him to survive. It was bigger than him now. Then Global Build Corp called again. They had seen the recovery, the stabilized systems, the soaring numbers. They wanted Forge. This time, their offer wasn't just hundreds of millions. It was billions. Matteo and the lead sat across from Damien in the small conference room, tension humming in the air. "This could secure the future," one of the engineers said softly. "It could end it," Damien replied. "Are you sure?" Matteo asked. Damien stared out the window. He saw the city skyline, the same skyline he had once ruled from Stratus's tower, the same one that had watched him fall. He remembered what it felt like to lose everything, because he had chased growth instead of strength. And he realized something sharp and clear. If he sold Forge, it would live. But it would not survive. Because survival wasn't about money. It was about soul. And Forge's soul was still young, still fragile. He turned back to his team. "No," he said. They blinked. "No," Matteo said carefully. "No deal," Damien said. "We build on our terms. Or not at all." Silence. Then Matteo smiled slowly. "Okay, our terms." The team left the room buzzing with energy, already sketching new plans. Damien stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the blank table, heart steady for the first time in years. He had walked away from billions, but he felt richer than he ever had. Because he finally understood, Stratus had been built on fear. Forge was being built on trust. And trust was unbreakable. By the end of the quarter, Forge had contracts on 3 continents. But this time, Damien wasn't hollow. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't burning. He worked 8 hours a day, then went home. He laughed during lunch. He listened more than he spoke. He had stopped trying to be the empire. And somehow, That's when he truly built one. The strange thing was how quietly it happened. There was no single moment, no fireworks, no triumphant headline announcing that Damian Cole had done the impossible. It just became true. Forge was no longer a comeback story. It was an empire. The shop had become a headquarters, 3 stories of glass and steel humming with life. Robotic arms lined the testing bays, sleek and precise. Autonomous rigs rolled out every week, bound for villages, cities, disaster zones. Forge units were building emergency housing after hurricanes, schools and refugee camps, clinics in war-torn regions. Where there had once been silence and dust, there was now laughter, chaos, and the sound of steel shaping the future. And Damian was no longer at the center of it. That was the part that startled him most. He still worked, but not like before. No 16-hour days, no frantic control. 8 hours, sometimes less. He walked the bright halls like a thread weaving through a tapestry that no longer needed him to hold it together. Teams made decisions without asking him first. Leads launched new projects he hadn't even heard about yet. Matteo ran operations so smoothly that Damian sometimes went days without opening his email. And he loved it, because this was what he had been trying to build all along. Not a monument to himself, but a machine of hope. Something that would outlive him. The press called him the phoenix of industry. Investors called him a visionary. Old rivals called him unstoppable. And Damian smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Because he no longer needed to prove anything. Not to them, not to himself. He had finally learned what Stratus had never taught him. Power isn't building something that needs you. Power is building something that doesn't. 1 year later, he stood on a stage for the first time in years, speaking at a university packed with students and young founders. He didn't bring slides. He didn't wear a suit. He just told them the truth. He told them about Stratus, about the collapse, about watching everyone walk away and realizing no one was coming to save him. He told them how he worked in silence while the world called him finished. He told them how he built Forge one piece at a time, not to get revenge, but to remember who he was when the noise was gone. The room was silent. And then he said this: "You don't need a crowd to believe in you. You don't need applause to build something that matters. You just have to keep showing up when everyone else stops." They walked away. And that's when I became unstoppable. The students rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall like an earthquake. Damian smiled faintly, stepped away from the microphone, and slipped quietly out the side door before they could surround him. Outside, the sunlight was warm. The city roared around him. The same city that had once buried him, now pulsing with the rhythm of the machines he had built. He walked through it without hurry, hands in his pockets, just a man again. Because he knew something now. If it all disappeared tomorrow, if the buildings crumbled, the money evaporated, the world forgot his name, he could build again. Because he no longer feared being alone. He had been alone, and he had built an empire. And if you're hearing this, if they've all left you, if the room is silent, if the world is watching you sink, stay. Stay one more night. Stay one more day. Stay and build with what's left. You don't need them to believe in you yet. You just need to keep going until they can't ignore you. Empires aren't built in applause. They're built in silence by those who refuse to quit. So stand up and start now.